So the stress trap is one that we can quickly fall into. And yet Jesus, even though he recognizes that our American culture wears stress like a badge of honor, and your Christmas season just isn't complete unless you have a few days where you scream and yell at everyone in the spirit of Christmas, and you've taken yourself to the nth degree and you've run to the end of your budget and you have no more resources or time or any, that almost seems to be coinciding with Christmas. And yet here's what Jesus says about it. There's a man who stores up all these barns and he has to have more and more and more. And then it says, but then that night he died and someone else got all of his stuff. So all of his concern was for naught because he didn't even achieve what he wanted to. Then verse 22. With that in mind, then Jesus said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. The problem with this phrase, I think, is that we keep reading and we never stop right here. And Jesus, I'm gonna guess, paused in this moment. And he looked at all of his disciples and he said, do not worry about your life. There's a sense in which, as Americans in the 21st century, we think that this is a little bit naive of a statement. Or that we look at Jesus, who is a ancient historical carpenter of the ancient Near Eastern Palestinian area, Shephelah carpenter, use your hands, no need to worry yourself with knowing what the Joneses next door had. So we look at Jesus and we almost do so in a pandering way. And we go, oh, see, you didn't have to worry about anything, but you, Jesus, don't live where I live. You don't have to worry about what I have to worry about. You don't have to do the things that I have to do. And something really interesting has creeped in, that we as a culture believe that the stimulus and the stigma and the have to do is higher than it's ever been before. And yet we're the culture that has technology at its fingertips more than anything ever before. I think you'd be really remiss if you think you would sit down with someone in Jesus' day and age and you told them, what do you have to worry about? They don't know where their next meal is actually coming from. They live under the Roman threat of oppression at all times. There's groups that are going to come and take them out every 20 or 30 years or so. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Persians, and the Jebusites, and the Budlites, and the Millerites, and they just keep coming and taking them out. Every day, who's going to take us over next? What are we going to do with all these things? And sometimes we have the nerve to go, well, but you don't have to host the Christmas party for the staff. It's different for people like us. And something happened. We bought this lie, hook, line, and sinker, that technology is going to give way to ease of life, and something really interesting took place. Henry Cloud, who's a famous writer and psychiatrist, he says that in the last 15 years, where technology has taken root all across the board, and you've got everything at your fingertips like never before, generalized anxiety disorder, depression, and mental illnesses that are treatable, diagnosable, clinical, have gone from 15% to 40%. 40%. That means if you get a room full of people and you say hi to two of them, the odds are that one of the two struggles with that. But what happened? I thought technology did do something. Here's what it did. Technology took us from a situation in which we woke up, we worked all day, we didn't know really what people had around us, and then we were so tired at the end of the day that we couldn't worry during the day because we were too busy, and we couldn't worry at night because we were too tired from all the busyness of the day. And now, a lot of us, our whole job revolves around distance, being on a computer, doing things. We can use ChatGPT to do everything, like this sermon that you're listening to. It's not original to me. I just said, give me a sermon about anxiety. Everything that I'm saying is directly from that script, even what I just said, okay? And as such, with all the free time that we had, we didn't do what the Corona commercials say to do. We didn't all go live on a beach and go, I've got nothing else to do. We all of a sudden found ourselves as humans in a space in which I know where my next meal is coming from. I can recognize what the forecast for tomorrow is. I know that there's no hurricane coming in a week, right? We didn't have to worry about all those things. And so instead, in the gap of space and time that we had in our society, we filled it with stress and worry and concern. Because now I can think about what's going to happen next week because I've got a lot of time between now and next week to process it because I'm not going to work 20 hours every day until we get there. So instead of technology doing exactly what it said it was going to do, which is to make our life easier, while it made our life easier, it also made us far more introspective, retrospective, future-focused, because we've got space to now. And whereas before I would have never thought to be so worried about what's happening in January, now I've got time to think through those things, and it starts to consume us as a culture. This is where Jesus says, you need to get a hold of this or it's going to get a hold of you. You need to take this and master it or it's going to take and master you. So he writes in this section, and he says it without really creating any caveats or parenthetical phrases. Do not worry about your life. This is another area in my own life that I wish I could tell you, you fools, stop worrying, be like me, but I can't. If I told you to be like me, you would also be worried. You would also be anxious and you'd also be stressed. So would you learn along with me how we can possibly get rid of this for this holiday season? Because that's how I've got to approach this. It's something that I struggle with. It's something that I think we do as a culture, but I think Jesus has a better way. Don't worry about what you're going to eat or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food and the body more than clothes. Then he brings our mind to this concept. He says, consider the ravens, okay? Think about ravens, which for most of us is easy to do. If I said, think of everything you know about ravens, you just did it, right? What do you know about ravens? Very little. Most of us, we're not bird experts. We don't know, right? Like there's a guy named Edgar Allan Poe who wrote a poem about a raven that knocks on doors, apparently, rapping on my chamber door, quoth the raven nevermore, that whole jazz. The Baltimore Ravens, because of Edgar Allan Poe living in Baltimore, are called the Baltimore Ravens. So that's a football team. Lamar Jackson was MVP in 2019. But beyond that, it's kind of like, I don't know much about ravens. Are they omnivorous? Do they eat seeds? No one really knows. But in their culture, these are the things that your world was made of. You're agrarian, so you knew what kind of seeds they grabbed, how you would prevent them from coming and ruining your crops. But you couldn't eat these as a Jew. These were considered unclean birds. So they were kind of your dime a dozen, run-of-the-mill bird in that society. So he really is drawing your attention, like on a beach in California, this phrase would say, consider the seagulls. Gross. Imagine that rats had wings, seagulls, right? They're kind of they're weird, but Jesus is like drawing our attention to these things. And he said, how often do you see a seagull who's sitting there going, I can't make it, I don't know where to find, right? Or is like, or have you ever stumbled upon like a seagull like greenhouse where they have like plants and they're toiling the seeds, or one there's like a little sweatshop there with all the seagulls just making textiles so they can sell. He said, don't you realize you see a lot of birds and they're all fed and they're all taken care of, and yet there's something that you have that these birds don't have. He then draws our attention to the wildflowers of the ancient Near East. The wildflowers of the ancient Near East, it's scorching heat during the day, but then it's a desert climate, so it's cool in the middle of the night, and so you might have a week where it's good weather and these flowers will sprout up, and then the next week it'll be hot and they all die. And the next week they sprout up. So Jesus says, I want you to consider two things. Think about ravens, how they don't toil and reap or turn the soil. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And then he uses this phrase. He says, and how much more valuable are you than birds? So this is a Jewish literary technique called kal vachomer, where a rabbi would, in order to make sense of godly things, he would make sense of humanly things and then relate it to God's provision, like this. If my son Brady were to come up to me and say, Dad, if a bad guy entered the house, would you fight him for me? I would say, Brady, I would die for you. Does that answer his question of what I would do if a bad guy entered the house? Yes. Because if I'm willing to die for you, everything else before that is fair game. I'll do everything else. If I'm willing to die for you, then yes, I would fight for you. Yes, I would sacrifice for you. Yes, I would get hurt for you. Yes, I would put myself in harm's way for you. That's obviously all in play. If I'm already willing to die for you, kal vachomer. If I'm willing to do that, imagine how much else I'm willing to do. In the same way, Jesus says, think about seagulls. And think about how they're provided for. And now, how much more if I provide for seagulls like that, and they're gross, dirty rats with wings. If I provide for them like that, imagine what I'm gonna do for you. What's the difference between you and a seagull? There's a lot. But the most namely of which is seagulls don't get to call God Father. That's not a term available to them. They're not redeemed, they're not sanctified, they're not chosen, they're not perfectly knit together in the mother's womb. They don't have the breath of God in them, the ruach, the nefesh chaya of the Old Testament. God's soul doesn't live, he doesn't breathe. We are different because we are children of God. So how much more, if dirty, ugly rats with wings have it, then you'll be provided for. And then he says, and then think about the lilies of the field. Think about the wildflowers that sprout up, they're gone. They sprout up and they're gone. Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like even one of these. And if that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today, tomorrow is thrown in the fire, call the Homer, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? Don't worry about what you eat or drink. Do not worry about it, for the pagan world runs after such things. So Jesus says, if you didn't believe in God and you didn't trust in me for salvation, Jesus says, which is what the word pagan means there. If you believe that this world is all there is, that everything's gonna end eventually in heat death, the Mona Lisa isn't truly beautiful, we just all voted that it was, but it's all gonna be destroyed one day when everything collapses, and Mother Teresa and Hitler will all have the exact same fate. There is no justice, there is no end, there's no nothing, everything's a cosmic accident, and there is no real purpose in the world, then you should worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow is just Mother Nature throwing her clay. And we don't really know what's gonna happen. So pagans are permitted to worry. But, Jesus says, but you know the one who holds tomorrow. And you know that I love you more than life itself. And you know that I would provide anything. You wanna know the real call of a homer? If I would be willing to send my son to die on the cross for you, do you really think that anything else is something I wouldn't sacrifice for you? If I gave my son, would I not provide for you? He changes the mind of the worrier, and he doesn't say, you've got nothing to worry about. He just says, worrying isn't gonna accomplish anything. There's a study done by two different universities, Cornell University, maybe you've heard of it. Cornell University, it's where Andy from The Office goes, so it's highly prestigious. And in it, in the Cornell University study, they had people with generalized anxiety disorder keep a journal of all of their concerns and worries for an extended period of time, 18 months. And in their journals, they started keeping track of everything they were worried about. You know what they found? 97% of everything they wrote in their journals never happened. 97% didn't even occur. And the 3% that did was completely unaffected by worrying about the outcome. Which means 100% of what you worry about is futile. In that study, what they found out through Penn State, the other study that was done, is that the things that we do worry about, 12% of what we worry about is about health conditions that we don't presently have. Isn't that funny? 12% of what we worry about is about the potential of having a health issue in the future. Do you know what that actually does? It creates a health issue. If you want someone to lose weight or if you want someone to get healthy, physically healthy, there's a somatic approach that stress has to your body with the excretion of cortisol and adrenaline. It makes you gain weight. It makes you less healthy. So worrying about your future health problem creates a present health problem. And when they did all of what they did, all the research and all the studying, what they found was that generalized anxiety was most people just thinking about potentialities that never even came to pass. And even those that did, worrying had no bearing on the outcome of them. And if it had any bearing, it was always negative. Because you've souped it up so much. How many of us have ever had a shower conversation with someone, but have refused to have it in person for months and months, and then the conversation either goes so how we didn't expect good, or so how we didn't expect bad, and our shower rehearsal isn't how it actually went. Have you ever noticed that? You ever notice how big and brave you are in the shower, and you're like, oh yeah? Well, yeah, you should. If I was half the man that you are, you'd be twice. No, that's not it, right? You're like getting it all figured out. And then it comes up and you're like the most meek and mild, gentle person ever. But then when you tell your friends, you're like, yeah, then I told him, like, you can just, forget you, man. That's what I told him. You said that. Well, no, but something like that. I think I apologized. So, but the way I said I'm sorry was like, I'm sorry. I said forget you without saying forget you. Oh, you did? Well, not really, but you know what I mean? Like we hype it up so much. And Jesus comes by and he looks at all of those things and he seems to say, being a Newtonian person, you're bound by time, right? You can't be in two places at once. You can't even think about two things at once, generally speaking. What that means is the word worry comes from this Germanic term Würgen, which is fun to say. The word anxious comes from an Old English word meaning to choke. And the Greek term for worry comes from the idea of dividing your mind. So when we talk about worry or anxiety, we're always kind of using the same idea, which is to put yourself in two places at once. What are those two places? For me, when I worry, I'm here physically in the present, but my mind is somewhere else completely. So when you have to come up and tug on my shirt 3 times and go, Chris, what? Sorry, I was in the future while I was here. Sorry, I was in the past while I was also here. I was divided. My mind was divided. I was having a conversation that I need to have in the future right now, and it didn't really help me at all because I still have to have that conversation in the future. Or how many of you, like I do, replay conversations that you had 3 weeks ago that you can't take back? Isn't the past tricky like that? Like, remember when I said, isn't the past tricky like that a minute ago? It's gone. It's done. And that's done. And now that's done. And now that's done. And I can't slow this process down. And everything that I'm doing is an inescapable truism for the rest of time that what just happened is now in rote history and it can never be changed. And yet, how often do I spend my time dividing myself between what I'm doing right now and what I was doing back then? I've divided myself. I'm worried. I'm worried how I'm perceived. I'm divided. Sometimes it's not just about time. I'm divided between people. I'm worried about what I'm going to say in this conversation, and then I'm worried about how you're going to respond in it, like I have any control over what you're going to respond like. I don't know what that's going to be like. And when I spend my time thinking about what you're going to do, that jumps into a category the Bible calls worry. It's when I consume my mind with things that I can't control and have nothing to do with me. The Bible calls that worry. But stress for us, we need to realize, is not really the problem because stress is just an alarm. Stress, like a smoke alarm, is not the issue, right? If a smoke alarm is going off in your house at night while you're sleeping, you do not solve the problem by getting rid of the smoke alarm. The smoke alarm is just telling you there's a fire somewhere, or someone's taken a shower too long and it's tripped it. Anyway, the problem is stress, if we just look at it and go, I need to get rid of stress, good luck. Because you just created a new stressor, which is how do I get rid of this stress thing, right? Just another thing on your plate. If you attempt to get rid of stress, you will only be more stressed out. So the problem is, like with any other sickness, you have to get to the root problem because the fruit of the problem is your stress, but the root of the problem is a lie. There's something I've believed about myself or that I misbelieve about God or that I perceive about the culture around me that's leading me to be stressed. Let me give you a little litmus test here as we move forward. Here's the questions we have to ask ourselves when we're feeling stressed. Here's some of the root reasons we're feeling stressed. The first thing is, sometimes the reason I'm stressed is because I said yes when I should have said no. Why we get so caught up in saying yes is because we believe something untrue. Here's the reason I say yes when I shouldn't say yes. Because I'm afraid you're not going to ask me again. Because I'm afraid you're going to think that I'm not a good sport. Because I'm afraid that my value lies in what I can provide for you. The reason I say yes when I know I should say no, because it goes against something in my calling, or it takes away from more important things that I'm supposed to be doing in my life, or whatever it is because I have some intrinsic deep belief that if I say no to you, that you'll go and tell other people he's not a very nice guy, he's not a very kind guy, which I know in my truth That's not who I actually am. But I don't just need to know who I am. I need you to believe that the way that I see myself is your reality. Isn't that way? You know how many different lines of concern I have when I don't just need to be concerned with who I am. I need to be concerned with how you think about who I am, how I present who I am, how you tell other people about who I am. And I know I'm not alone in this. I say yes, not because I go, all these things sound fun. I do it because I've believed that if I don't, then something more core to who I am is going to be messed with, or that my reputation will take a hit. Mr. Rogers taught me this, and I'm here to teach you it. Sometimes you're busy because you said yes. The man could take off shoes with the best of them. He invited people to be his neighbor, and he turned out to be a pretty smart guy. I'm busy because I said yes. Sometimes if we want to be okay, we have to get over the insecurity that we have that if I say no, you'll think less of me. Or that if I set boundaries for myself and I say no to you when it's not my responsibility. Now listen, here's a problem that we get between boomer generation and millennials. We tend to have this separation in culture, and both sides are mad at each other. And I'm just the messenger. I love you, I'm on your team. No one get mad at me. But the older generation looks at the younger generation appropriately and says, the idea of self-care isn't a reason for you to not care or do anything. That's not self-care, that's sloth. Failure to do what love requires and to take responsibility in your life is not self-care. It's not treating yourself, it's sloth. Conversely, having to say yes to everything because it's what we do or it's what gives us value or whatever it is sometimes a boundary that the younger generation has and going, I'm okay with you being mad at me for saying no, and we can both learn something from one another. But if we just categorize the other as lazy or boomer, overambitious, gotta do everything, old Saint Nick over there, like, you gotta slow down. Because somewhere in the middle between perceiving my worth as being busy and perceiving my value as being in infinite self-care is where God wants us. Resting in our identity of who he is, but working as if the world is coming to an end tomorrow. I love this old adage, blessed is the one who works so hard they haven't time to worry, and who works so hard that at night, he's too tired to worry. He's too busy to worry during the day, and he's too tired to worry at night. And when I say busy, I don't mean spending 14 hours in the office. I mean, you're at work, but then you're investing in the things of God's kingdom, and you're engaging with your kids, and you're wrestling with your sons, and you're wrestling with your daughters, and you're playing catch, and you're a good husband, and you're engaged with the world around you. That's what I mean by busy. Busy, for a lot of us who are younger, think that everything that busy requires is all the things of the adult world that require us to be kind of curmudgeon-y and old and buy, sell, like the guy on his phone all the time in the old 90s movies. That's not what it means. Sometimes I can be busy doing the things of God, investing in my family, engaging with my kids, asking good questions to my wife. That's what busyness can look like. Which one of my yeses should have been a no? Number 2, what lie am I believing? What value statement about myself am I believing? That if I don't do this, then I might not be perceived as this. The reason these two things are important, because a lot of us find ourselves paying hidden fees in our life. Let me tell you what that means. The third question is, what hidden fee am I paying? Have y'all ever flown Frontier Airlines before? Here's how Frontier Airlines works. You go into like a comparative airline ticket site, and Frontier Airlines is always like $13. It's great. And then you go to check in and you bring like a microscopic purse, and they go, oh, is that a microscopic handbag? Yeah, you'll see our little thing right here. Your handbag needs to be either bigger than this or smaller than this, but it can't be the size that you're bringing on right now. That'll be $37 if you want to bring that microscopic handbag on. And then you're like, fine, the ticket was only $13, now it's only $50. That's still better than the other airlines. Then you go to take a step on the plane and they're like, ooh, are you gonna wear clothes on this flight? Yeah, I would be naked if I didn't. Yeah, that's gonna be a problem. We have a non-nudity fee that we're charging now. If you wanna keep your clothes on, you don't have to. If you do take your clothes off, we are gonna press charges, and you'll have to pay a fee called offensive nudity fee. So you have a choice. You can either, and you're like, what? These are so hidden fees. This is not a $13 flight. This is more expensive than ever before. And I feel cheap now, right? We do this in life too. Here's how it lists. This is how it works in my life. My kid comes up to me and he says, Dad, I want to play catch with you in the yard. And I say, hold on. Because once I do everything I need to get done for my work, then I'm going to be able to afford more things. And when I can afford more things, I can buy them for you years down the road, and then we'll be able to have time together, father and son. Or I can just have father-son time right now. This is the lie that we tell ourselves, I think especially as men. Well, I'm working for my family so much so they can have what it is, but there's so many times that I've met people who are on their deathbed who when they think back and look at it, they just wish, instead of looking, it's like the guy with the barns. You build more and more barns so that one day you can be a great dad when being a great dad can happen right now. It can just be you saying yes when you feel like saying no. The hidden fee that we pay sometime in the Christmas season is we go, I need everything to be perfect so we can have a really great time as a family, and we're gonna have everything laid out so the hors d'oeuvres are done in time, and it'll be awesome. But to get there, you've screamed at everyone for 2 weeks, and no one wants to be around you. But the presents are wrapped. That's a hidden fee. You accomplished your task at much too high a price. Hors d'oeuvres are well set, Christmas dinner is well prepared, everyone's comfy and cozy, but no one wants to be around each other because you've spent the last 2 weeks being a stress case that brings everyone to the brink of wanting to leave the home at all times. This is what Paul says in Romans 7. Why do I do what I don't want to do? And if you get caught in this trap, it's good for us to be aware of it. As the Bible talks about the things we experience, especially upstairs in our mind, we got to ask ourselves a couple of questions, because depending on what the actual, stress is kind of this catch-all term, and it's good to identify it, because once we identify what we're experiencing, Scripture comes in and can help us, right? It's like when you talk to some guys and you're like, how are you feeling? Well, I'm mad. It's like, well, that's a very safe emotion. Anger is kind of this catch-all term, but what are you angry about? Are you angry because you're jealous? Are you angry because you're insecure? Are you angry because you've been emasculated? Where is this anger coming from? Stress is kind of like that. Stress is kind of a catch-all term that tells us that something's off, but I might not know what that is. Here's a couple of questions and a little chart that might help us when we're processing this. The first question to ask myself is, can I do something about how I'm feeling right now? Can I do something to change what's happening? Maybe I'm stressed. I'll use as an analogy. I'm really stressed because I'm not sure that the present that I got for someone is the one that they wanted. Or maybe I'm really worried because I'm not sure my kids are gonna grow up and be good citizens of the world, right? There are clearly things that you can do to try to make your kids better citizens, but once you've done all that you can do, there's really nothing else to be done. So we ask ourselves this question. It's this first item, which is there something I can do? Is this in my purview, right? Is this, do I have the resources to accomplish what I need to do? Because I might go, man, I see an issue and I'm really worried because there's gonna be kids all over the world tonight who aren't gonna have presents for Christmas. A good thing to be concerned about. What can you do about it? I can volunteer as much as I can. I don't have very much money. Okay, do all you can. And then when that's done, the answer to the question is no, I can't do anything else. The second question we want to ask, do I know what I am to do? Can I do something, and do I know what it is? Whether you answer yes or no to all of these questions is going to help you to identify what emotion you're experiencing and what Scripture can come along and help us in that moment. Sometimes the answer to both of these questions is yes. So for Christmas Eve, I wrote like a little play for our staff to perform for you if you're in the afternoon services. Is it Tony Award worthy? You'll have to be the judge. No, it's not. But I'm also trying to help people who've never acted before. I'm like directing and like, this is enunciation and this is projection and this is all these things. And so the night of, we might get up on stage and everyone's dressed in ridiculous outfits and ready to perform for all the kids out there. You'll be in the audience as well. And we're going, oh man, I hope I remember my lines. I hope I do this. But you've prepared all this time for that. And in that moment, you're experiencing something that we call pressure. Pressure is when I can do something about it and I know what I am to do. Pressure is what we experience when we've got something that falls in line with our purview. It's part of my calling. I am resourced. It is under my burden of responsibility, and I need to execute this thing. That can make us feel pressure. You're hosting a party at your house. Everyone's coming over on Thursday. You've got everything ready, and you want to make sure you're a good host. The night of, you're moving around, you're going to feel pressure. Pressure is very appropriate. The problem with pressure is you tend to smuggle a lie into pressure, which becomes performance-based identity. When I experience pressure, it's very okay for me to be ready backstage on Christmas Eve night and go, I hope everyone likes this because I want them to have a great Christmas season. And if this can add a little bit to it, well, that's the spirit of Christmas. That's appropriate pressure. Now, if my pressure is this, if they don't like this, they're not gonna like me and they'll think that I'm less of a person and it's gonna, that has become performance-based identity. Pressure can sometimes make us feel like I'm not worthy or I'm not enough. Or if I don't perform, I'm worth less than I was before. Pressure is appropriate as long as pressure doesn't begin to identify our value. Pressure is what William Tell feels when he's shooting an apple off of his son's head. Remember that story? He pulls back the arrow, shoots the apple off of his son's head. The son is blindfolded up against a tree. The son does not experience pressure. The son experiences worry. Worry is when you think and you process and you go, you know what? I've done all I can. And there's nothing else I can do. And so I suppose I'll just stand here. He's worried. He doesn't feel pressure. He doesn't have to perform. He is the passive party in this experiment. In fact, if he moves, he might make it worse. So he just stands still. William Tell feels pressure. Remember, here's the flow of the wind. Here's how far he is away. Here's how tightly I need to create the tension. Here's all those things. And old Worrier, his son over here, is going, hope he doesn't miss. But after that, there's nothing else he can do. So he submits it. I'm worried. Done. Sometimes you can find yourself in a position of worry, which is what the text talks about in Luke chapter 12, where it says, you do what you can do, but beyond that, everything else is now in God's purview. The third category, it's fear, or maybe for a lot of us, we would call it being overwhelmed. This is where I know I should do something, I just don't know what it is. You ever had a to-do list so long that you don't do anything? Have you ever been so paralyzed with all the stuff that you know you need to accomplish that you just don't do anything? And you go in a room and cry as if that's gonna make it worse? Because now the first thing on your list is, I gotta look like I wasn't just crying. You're like icing your face, like, oh no, people are gonna think I've got emotions. This is the feeling of being overwhelmed. I know I've gotta do something, I just don't know what it is. I don't know where to start. This last category, which, again, Henry Cloud writes about in his book, he says in the past generation, we've gone from 15% to 40% in terms of this category, which is anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder. Anxiety is interesting because it doesn't know what it's afraid of. Anxiety is, it's this old English word for being choked, right? It feels suffocating. And the problem with anxiety is you don't even know how to accomplish it. You don't even know what it is that you would need to accomplish if you knew what it was you were afraid of. That's why it can be so dangerous. It's dangerous in its ambiguity. Anxiety grows in a petri dish of ambiguity. If you don't know what a petri dish is, we've had this thing in our house recently where we thought there was mold in the house. I don't know. I'm not a mold expert. I don't really know why. A guy came over to our house, and sometimes kids put things in toilets they shouldn't. I'll send pictures if you want to know more. But then you got to have a guy come over because the floor floods. And when the floor floods, you got to make sure there's nothing wrong. So the guy comes out, he goes, I would get this checked for mold. Well, clearly, whenever someone says you might have mold, it's like when they say you might have bed bugs. What happens when you go to bed that night? Everything starts to itch, right? Like if a kid in my kids' classes at their elementary school gets lice, everyone's got lice, right? Now I've got lice. The dog's got lice, right? Like the lice on my dog have lice. Everyone's got lice. And so we started being like, oh man, I feel like, as soon as you mention the word mold, everyone's like, so I did what every red-blooded American man does. I ordered a mold test kit on Amazon. I researched it, found the best one, waited for Prime Day, got it on sale. Hilkens never pay full price. So get the Petri dish, and what you do is you set the Petri dish in your bathroom for a couple of hours, and then you put the lid on, and then you see if anything grows. And after a couple of days, there were colonies of mold. And like they had elected their own leaders, and they have evolved into being like tiny people, and I was like, no, they're gonna take us over. But, so now I'm like, oh no, I've made my kids sick. I'm gonna be patient zero for the new rheumatic plague. Everyone's gonna die. The black lung is back, and I'm responsible for it. This is the reason my kids are sick. I've got a new wife. She's sick. It's my fault. Rational stuff. So we hire like a professional mold guy. He comes in, he does a sample and everything. We're like, I don't want to show this to you because I'm afraid you've never seen anything like it before. Like show him the dish. He's like, okay, gotcha. Does samples of everything, gives us a mold report a few days later. And he said, your toxic mold level is at 0 and your mold levels is lower than the general population of San Diego. And I was like, that can't be because look. And you know what he said? He said, everyone's house, if you put a petri dish in it, has mold everywhere all the time. Welcome to church. Mold isn't the problem. Toxic mold or way too much mold can be problematic for those with sensitivities. He goes, but everyone's got mold. There's mold everywhere. You can't go to the ocean without mold. You can't go anywhere. Mold is everywhere. But see, the petri dish, it's perfectly designed to catch those things and to grow them. The perfect environment for anxiety to grow in your mind is to live in unspecified ambiguity with what you're worried about. That's the petri dish that anxiety grows. It's just that that's why I think specificity in prayer can be so powerful for the Christian. Instead of saying, Lord, I'm really stressed about next week, to go, Lord, I'm concerned that this isn't gonna play itself out. God, could you do this? Specificity in prayer, it's like shining light on mold, right? Or having like a UV on mold, it exterminates it. But so often we isolate ourselves, we live in the darkness, we don't specify what's going on, and so anxiety grows and the colonies form and then it takes over. The cool thing that Isaiah 9 talks about when it talks about the Christmas season, there are these 4 understandings of Jesus. Isaiah chapter 9 says this, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Sometimes when we say those things, we say them so often, right? It's in every Christmas pageant ever where the kid comes up and we always have like the first and second graders do that part and they don't have a real good grasp on their R's yet, right? You know what I'm talking about? Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. I just went to my kids this last week at their school. Cutest thing ever, right? Lots of mispronunciation, but you'll love it because they're great. And you just kind of roll through that. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. But you know what I realized? The idea that God came and dwell with us is this really unique aspect of our God in particular, which is that he is Emmanuel, God with us. And all those attributes of who he was are not really necessary for him to be God. He wouldn't need to be a wonderful counselor to be God, would he? He could be the distant deist God that just stays up there and goes, hope you guys figure it out. But instead, he was a God who dwells with us. He's the wonderful counselor God. He's the mighty, powerful God. He's an everlasting Father. This is a notion that in many other belief systems, this is a heresy to say that God would consider us his children. If you open the Quran and you try to say, I'm going to talk to Allah as Father, they would say you're a heretic. You cannot talk to him as Father. Everlasting Father, and he's the Prince of Peace. The interesting part about all of these things that we experience in life is it seems almost like Jesus has specified himself as the solution for all of those. I'll tell you what I mean. If we don't know really what to do, it's that sense of fear. We're overwhelmed with what's happening. We don't know the next step to take. We're experiencing some level of fear or being behind the 8 ball. I don't know what I need to do next. Jesus has come as our wonderful counselor. That word wonderful in the original language means incapable of being understood from human rationale. When Jesus appears in the Old Testament, someone asks him what his name is, and he says, my name is Wonderful. That word wonderful means my name wouldn't make sense to you if I told it to you. This is the kind of counselor Jesus is. Jesus comes into our life in the middle of our stress and worry and concern, and he provides counsel that it's alien to us. It's not the way that we would advise one another. It's not the way we would advise ourselves, and he is the wonderful counselor for our fears. But he's not just that. For those of us experiencing worry, where we go, well, where's my food gonna come from tomorrow? Is God really here? Is he in control of all things? He's also become mighty God for those of us who experience worry. Sometimes, in order for us to relinquish the stress in our life, we don't need to hear anything else besides God going, don't you know that I am the mighty God who's in charge of everything? Don't you know I'm sovereign over the future? Don't you know I see all things? For the worried mind, he comes as mighty God. For the mind experiencing pressure that thinks to themselves, if I don't pull this off, maybe people will not like me. If I don't pull this off, maybe I'll be less than. For those of experiencing pressure, he is an everlasting Father, because this is what a good dad does. When your kid's about to have their track meet, their ballet recital, their piano recital, the big game, or a stupid Christmas Eve play at College Ave Church, a good father looks at his kid and goes, did you know that what you're about to do has zero bearing on what I feel about you? Did you know that whether you are the first one to cross that finish line or you come dead last by about 3 laps, you're no less my son? I want you to win because you want to win, but it has nothing to do with how I care about you. When we operate from that position of victory with our Heavenly Father, we are so much healthier for our relationships around us. When we don't go, God, I'm gonna perform and I'm gonna achieve and I'm gonna succeed so that you're proud of me and that you love me. The Christian worldview is backwards. The Christian worldview says, because that kind of a God loves a sinner like me, I'm gonna achieve and succeed freely because even if I don't, it doesn't matter. It enables me to love better. It enables me to forgive truer. It enables me to perform in such a way that I do so without a care of thinking that if I don't, it has some bearing on my worth. The Christian resource is different. There is an extrapolated, unreasonable level of people in sports that are involved in Christianity that perform at the highest level in the positions where the mind is most important. Do you want to know why? I think a lot of people at the highest level of sport, there's a connection with them following Jesus because of this. They're able to be free in making the pass or shooting the shot or throwing the ball because they recognize that whether they do or not has no bearing on who they are. I love this dichotomy, and I'll say it quickly. Tom Brady and Trevor Lawrence. Tom Brady, 6-time world champion. At the time, he'd only won 3 Super Bowls, like a pedestrian. He had won 3 Super Bowls. He'd already had 1 whole Hall of Fame life, and he's on 60 Minutes, and they ask him, Tom Brady, you're married to Giselle at the time. You have 3 Super Bowls. You're an MVP. You've got more money than you know what to do with. What's next for you? And Tom Brady says, I've got all this stuff, but then I think to myself sometimes, God, there's gotta be more than this. And while he took God's name in vain, he actually had the answer right there in his question because he doesn't know Jesus. Meanwhile, Trevor Lawrence, having already won a national championship with Clemson, is asked what kind of pressure he feels going into the next season. You know what he says? I feel no pressure. Because I'm not playing football to achieve anything. I'm already loved and forgiven of all my sins, and I've got eternity looking forward, so football's nothing to me. And he's able to play free, and he's able to play inside of that identity. That's where the most powerful aspect of Christianity is found. You're already loved. And for the anxious mind, he's become our Prince of Peace. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, which is perfect because the Christmas time, which is his birthday, is where we experience the deepest fear, worry, pressure, and anxiety. If only in my mind I could get there quicker than needing the reminder once a year that he is all these things for me. The reason it's so difficult, and you'll recognize this, is that truth leaks and falsehood sticks in the human heart, doesn't it? Let's pray. God, we surrender these falsehoods to you. I surrender my own falsehoods to you, thinking to myself, I've got to really achieve it. I've got to really succeed. I've got to really do these things if I want you to look down on me and be proud of me. If I want you to look down on me and be delighted in me. If I want to be worthy of salvation, but I just have to start from the position of recognizing all my stress comes from believing the lie that somehow I've got to achieve or perform for you to love me. God, I want to live out of the victory that you've already won in my life, not to strive for the victory. Would you teach me in this season to relieve stress, but not by just focusing on being comfortable or full of leisure, but instead that I would so rest in the conviction, the calling that you've given me, that I'm not sidetracked by the worries and the concerns of the past, the present, and the future. Would you make me free like that? Give me your truth, because your truth tends to leak from my heart. I need it new every morning. In your name we pray, amen.